Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Gopinath Radha Gopinath Shri Radhe. Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Gurudeva Jaya Gurudeva Jaya Gurudeva Jaya Gurudeva. Nitya Lila Pravishta Om Vishnupad Paramahans Parivrajacharya Stotra Shada Shri Srimad Bhaya Charanaravindra Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Nitya Lila Pravishta Om Vishnupada Paramahans Parivrajacharya Stotra Shada Shri Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Nitya Lila Pravishta Om Vishnupada Srila Gaur Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai. Nitya Lila Pravishta Om Vishnupada Srila Satchidananda Bhaktivinoda Thakur Ki Jai. Nitya Lila Pravishta Om Vishnupada Srila Jagannathas Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai. Shri Gauriya Vaishnav Guru Varga Ki Jai. Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Thakur Ki Jai. Shri Caitanya Caritamrita Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Ganga Mai Ki Jai. Jamuna Mai Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Tulsi Devi Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrinda Ki Jai. Nitai Gaura Premanande Hari Hari Bol. All glories assemble devotees Hare Krishna. All glories assemble devotees Hare Krishna. All glories assemble devotees Hare Krishna. All glories Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Om Jnanatirmirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupah Kadamahyam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha. He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gora Tushe Namaha. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripasindhubhya cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, welcome again to Shri Caitanya Caritamrita class. We are continuing on from last week's discussion, which was delving into the final concluding pramanas of the discussion regarding the first element of the second question of the Rai Ramananda Samvad. I am hoping by the end of today we will have concluded that second question, and then hopefully by Wednesday we will actually have concluded the philosophical section of the Rai Ramananda Samvad. That is what I'm aiming for, so that there's a nice closure before the Damodarashtakam classes begin. So, what were we discussing then? We were discussing the answer to the first element of the second question of the Rai Ramananda Samvad, which, and today will probably be the last time I mention it, is what? Shri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is asked regarding clarifications of 4 points: Krishner Swarup, Radhar Swarup, Roshototto, and Prem Totto Rup. Prem Totto Rup. So these 4 things have been asked about. And so this discussion has mainly been focusing on Krishner Swarup, Krishna's Swarup. And the reason for that is because the other topics are a little esoteric, and so we will probably only discuss them today. And then hopefully we'll just conclude on that. We will be skipping over a lot of this section just because it is not appropriate for public discourse. So then, what were we discussing? We were going over, last week, we were going over the 3 texts. We began with the text from Gita Govinda, And he was speaking about the nature of how Krishna is so attractive. Gita Govinda explains, Krishna is so attractive that all of his devotees are immaculately attracted to him. Cupid himself is conquered by the beauty of Krishna. And then he quotes the next text from Srimad Bhagavatam, which is saying that even Narayan himself is so attracted to the beautiful form of Krishna, which is why he stole those children. Then there was the point, the prayers of the wives of Kaliya, and they were making the point, the main point of this shlok is that even the goddess of fortune, who was so chaste to Narayan, even she is attracted to this beauty of Krishna. And of course we discussed something about the past lives of Kaliya and all. And there's some nice purports from that. And I was going to delve on them more, but I really do want to try and aim to complete the Rai Ramananda Sambad by Wednesday. So we won't discuss them too much. But there's very sweet purports, because the wives of Kaliya, what were they praying? They were saying that even some of the greatest yogis, they spent so much time to attain the dust of your lotus feet, Krishna. And yet you, upon the head of this demon, upon the many heads of this demon, you have scattered that dust all over all of his heads? How can this be? So we understood the pastime. There were the curses, which shows that the Supreme Lord is so merciful to his devotee. And that if a devotee curses you, most of the time, that becomes a blessing. The devotee's curse is never truly a curse. There's always an element of a blessing in there. His Holiness Gaur Govinda Goswami Maharaj would often make this point, that the Vaishnav's curse is mercy. Not because it's not actually a curse. If one gets genuinely cursed by a Vaishnav, then it's game over, buddy. But to be cursed by a Vaishnav normally means that there is some blessing hidden in there. So we should understand like this. And furthermore, it also shows the power of the devotee's word. Because when the Supreme Lord came, what did he say? Shri Bhagavan Uvacha. He didn't say, okay, I undo the curses. He says, how can I undo the words that my devotee has spoken? This is how we know the devotee has so much power. Because Krishna is willing to bend reality itself to make the devotee's words come true. This is the nature of the Lord's love for the devotee. The Lord's not just love for the devotee, but how he is conquered and controlled by that love. So then, we heard that text. Then, we now come to the last text. And on this text, we will conclude. So it's one statement by Krishna's Kaviraj Thakur. I'm quoting Rai Ramananda. And then one Shastra Pramana. And then after that, we will go on to our next topic of Radhar Shurup. So what does Rai Ramananda say? He says, not only is Krishna attractive to his devotees, not only is Krishna attractive even to his expansions, not only is Krishna attractive even to the chaste spouse of his expansions, Krishna is attractive even to himself. Apon mudhurje hore apnar mon. Apna apni chahe korite alingon. So, Lord Krishna's sweetness is so attractive that it steals away his own mind. Thus, even he wants to embrace himself. There is a deep purport in this. And that purport will be brought out by us hearing the next text, which is quoted from Lalita Madhava. Aparikalita purva kaschamatkārakari Spurati mama gariyanesha madhurya puraha ayam maham api hanta prekshya yam lubdha chetaha sarabha sam upabhoktum kamaye radhikeva. What does this mean? Upon seeing his own reflection in a bejeweled pillar of his Dwarka palace, Krishna desired to embrace it, saying, alas, I have never seen such a person before. Who is he? Just by seeing him, I have become eager to embrace him, exactly like Srimati Radharani. So here we find that not only does Krishna attract himself in his expansion, but Krishna also attracts himself as himself. This text, Lalita Madhav, we have already discussed many months ago now. Many months ago we discussed this text on our discussion of the overview of the Goswami's works. So I will not speak upon it now, but if you would like, you can go back and check the recording of that discussion. But Lalita Madhav, we did discuss, it's a very elevated text. So the same comments that were said about the Gita Govinda. When we see Gita Govinda, we think, okay, now is getting time for me to tap off this train. Now is getting time for me to to maybe realize what is appropriate for public discourse, what is appropriate for my sadhana, and what is not. So, having seen this text, Lalita Madhav, we should think, okay, we are really entering into rasic zone now. But what is this text saying then? Exactly what I said already. Krishna even attracts himself when he's going through Dwarka. He will see in the pillars, those beautiful pillars, he will see his reflection. And he'll think, who is this beautiful person? Wow, I am so attracted to the beauty that is here. And Krishna even runs to embrace it. But he cannot embrace him. Because how can Krishna embrace himself? How can Krishna do that? He can't. But there is a very deep purport in this. And this is a theme that we will come to later on at the discussion of the conclusion of this question. Because there is Rai Ramananda, he's building up to something. Ramananda Rai knows full well who Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is. He is more than aware. So hint by hint, he is touching upon, this is your nature, Mahaprabhu. I know who you are. I know who you are. So he's hinting towards it. And what is the hint here? Krishna cannot embrace himself. Krishna cannot hug himself. Krishna cannot experience his own beauty in the way that Radharani does. See? This is the value. This is the significance. How does the shlok end? Radhikeva. We know, Trinadapi sahishnuna taror iva sah. Trinadapi sunichena taror iva sahishnuna. So, iva means like. Iva means in the same manner as. So, like Srimati Radharani, like the devotee, I cannot taste my own beauty. But I have the desire to. I become eager to be able to embrace like my devotee does, but I cannot. This mystery of Krishna's all-attractiveness, being able to even attract himself, is resolved fully in Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is Krishna, who is also able to embrace Krishna, because he is Krishna taking on the mood of his devotee. Now Krishna's tension in Dwarka, that I am seeing my own reflection, but I cannot embrace it, I cannot hug it, I cannot hold it dear, I cannot love it because it is me, is gone. Because Mahaprabhu is Krishna forgetting that he is Krishna. And it is Krishna then, I mentioned in the very, very first class on Madhya Lila, that this Madhya Lila is Krishna's search for himself. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Krishna, not only trying to find all the lost spirit souls, but it is Krishna trying to find himself. It is Krishna trying to discover himself, to taste his own beauty. So because of this, here, Rai Ramananda, he's hinting towards something. He's hinting towards the actual nature of Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So here, we should try to understand. There are some things being indicated here. So, this is what is being referenced here. And so he is concluding on this point. The implication is, this is Krishna. This is Krishna's Swarup. This is the nature of Krishna. But with that line, with that final point, that Radhikeva, Rai Ramananda, he is leaving open. Yes, this is Krishna's Swarup, but I have not mentioned one point. But that point is implicit. I am not stating it yet. I am leaving it to be stated elsewhere. Because, of course, Mahaprabhu wishes to say hidden. He doesn't want people to know he's Krishna. Very few cases he reveals himself to be directly Krishna. So he's leaving this here. Because without the knowledge of Mahaprabhu, actually one's knowledge of Krishna's Swarup, one's knowledge of Krishna's Swarup is incomplete. It is not factually full. It is not the fullness that it could be, and it is not the fullness that it should be. Without knowing Mahaprabhu, we cannot know Krishna, not fully, not properly. So that is why that implication has been mentioned. And then Rai Ramananda, finally, we have concluded the discussion of Krishna's Swarup. What does he say? He says, E to shonkhepe kohilo Krishner Swarup. Ebe shonkhepe kohi shunno Radha Totto Rup. I have thus briefly explained the original form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Now let me describe the position of Srimati Radharani. So, we will begin again. We will discuss the first parts. Again, Rai Ramananda does the exact same thing. He begins with Tattva, and then he discusses Leela. He begins with the philosophical conclusion of Radharani's nature. But what does he conclude with? He concludes with her pastimes, her transcendental qualities. And those transcendental qualities we will not speak about at all. We will only speak about the Tattva. So we will discuss the Tattva a bit, but then we will fully skip over to the answer to the third question, which also involves the answer to the fourth question. The third and the fourth are tied together because Rasa and Prem are inherently tied. So we should try to understand their answer together. In a more in-depth study, we can separate the two. But because of the scope of this class, because we do not wish to delve too deeply into these things prematurely, we will treat them together. So, what does Rai Ramananda begin by saying? He says, Krishnor ananta shakti tate teen prodhan chit shakti Maya Shakti, Jeev Shakti, Nam. So Krishna has unlimited potencies, which can be divided into three main parts. Because of course, Srimati Radharani is the potency of Krishna. These are the spiritual potency, the material potency, and the marginal potency, which is known as the living entities. So like this, we can come to understand. Like this, we can come to understand. Radharani, she is not actually Ananta Shakti, she's Eka Shakti. We should not be confused and think that well, therefore there are many Radharanis. Actually, by Ananta Shakti, that means there are Ananta Vrittis. The word Vritti is a transformation, is a different function of the one Shakti, that is Srimati Radharani. Actually, all Shaktis are just expansions of, or rather Vrittis, transformations of Srimati Radharani, who is the original and full potency. It says Krishnor Ananta Shakti, but also we can say Krishnor Eko Shakti. Kevol Eko Shakti. There is only one potency. But Ananta meaning all the Vrittis. This word Vritti can mean transformation, it can mean movement. It is similar, it actually is coming, the English word is coming from the word Vritti, of vert. So you have introvert. An introvert is somebody who goes inwards. An extrovert is somebody who goes outwards. Somebody who subverts turns something upside down. Sub underneath and then vert, twisting. So this word vert, it sounds like vritti, because it comes from that word. So vritti is like a transformation of the Shakti. So then, what are those three? And they're described in different ways. So, we will read these few texts discussing this. Ontoronga bohironga totoshtha kohijare ontoronga shorupo shokti shobar upore. So, all of these potencies, internal and external and marginal, they are all the potencies of the Supreme Lord. But the highest is the internal potency. And then there is a quotation from the Vishnu Purana. Again, let us not forget, Shastra is the foundation of this discussion, not random opinions. Vishnu Shakti Para Prokta Kshetra Gyakhya. No, Kshetra Gyakhya Tatha Para Avidya Karma Sangyanya Tritiya Shaktir Ishyate. The original potency of Lord Vishnu is superior or spiritual, and the living entity actually belongs to that spirit superior energy. But there is another energy called the material energy, and this third energy is full of ignorance. Shochidananda moyo Krishner Shorup, Otoibo Shorup Shokti Hoi Tin Rup. Originally, Krishna is Satchidananda Vigraha, the transcendental form of eternity, bliss and knowledge. Therefore, his personal potency, the internal potency, has three different forms. So, before we discuss these three different forms, let us first discuss. There is internal, external, and marginal. These can sometimes have different names. Sometimes the external is called Maya Shakti, the marginal is called Jiva Shakti, and the internal is called Swarupa Shakti. Other times they are called, the external is called the Bahiranga Shakti. The intermediary marginal potency is called the Tatastha Shakti, and the internal potency is called the Antaranga Shakti. Different times they have different names, but they all refer to the three things. Actually, all are subdivisions of the internal potency. Maya, the external potency, is like a shadow of the internal potency, but is still an expansion from the internal potency. And the spirit souls are just tiny little fragments expanding out from that internal potency. And what is that internal potency? It is Srimati Radharani. Srimati Radharani. So in one sense, everything is just Radha and Krishna. I have stressed a lot that we are not the Supreme Lord, and we are not. And we are not Srimati Radharani either. But we should also understand that it is Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva. Just as much as there is Bhed, there is also some Abhed. There's also some, unity. There's not just difference. And in this sense, because Radharani is expanding out to make everything is Radharani. So everything is Radha and Krishna, because Krishna and Radha are also one and the same. So in reality, we cannot run away. We only give ourselves the illusion of running away from Radha and Krishna. Actually, we can never fall away from Radha and Krishna, because they are always everywhere. Just in different ways. And some people might say, this Mahamaya, this material world, Srimati Radharani, this does not feel like that ocean of mercy that Srimati Radharani is. This is a terrible place, full of suffering and pain. How can I say that this is Srimati Radharani? And we must remember, it is not Srimati Radharani. It is an energy that is a reflection of hers. But still that mercy is there. Mahamaya only gives us what we want. If we want to go into the deepest of ignorance, we can. What is Mahamaya made of? Tamo, Rajo, Sattva. These are the three guna, the three modes of material nature. And if we want to go deep into ignorance, eating all sorts of food, onion, garlic, meat, sleeping all day, just watching movies, doing nothing with our time, then Mahamaya, she will mercifully give us what we want. But if we wish to make spiritual progress, then she also gives us Sattva Gun. Sattva Gun is not inherently spiritual, but Mahamaya cannot give the spiritual, because spiritual practice is the internal potency of Bhakti Devi. But still, Mahamaya can do the best she can, which is to give the material platform most conducive to Bhakti, which is the mode of goodness. These three modes are the ways she will reciprocate the desires and needs of each spirit soul. So she is just mercifully doing the best she can to her capacity. It is not that Mahamaya is evil. Sometimes we'll say, oh, that's Maya Prabhu. What is evil is our usage of Maya, is our engagement with Maya. Not Maya Devi herself. Mahamaya is worshipable. But it is the way that we interact with Mahamaya that is not very worshipable. So, with these three modes, in ignorance there is only suffering. In goodness there is as close as we can get to joy in the material world. And in passion, well, there's a mix of both. Sorry, the sun is just setting right now here. So, that's why the glare is a little bad. So then, continuing on, we then read. What does Ramananda Rai say? He says something very interesting. He says that because Krishna is Satchidananda, his personal potency, his internal potency, his Swarupa Shakti, also has three forms. It has three main means of expressing itself. And what are they? Anandangshe hladini, shodangshe shondhini, chidangshe shombit, jare jnana kori mani. So, hladini is the aspect of bliss, sandhini of eternal existence, and samvit of cognizance, which is also accepted as knowledge. So these three, in the same way that Satchit Ananda is present in Krishna, Satchit Ananda is also present in his internal potency, which are hladini, sandhini, and samvit. And with these three, all that happens in the spiritual realm is facilitated. All of them are provided. And there's a quote of Vishnu Purana to reinforce that. Hladini, sandhini, samvit, ya tvayeka sarva samshraye, hladata kari mishra, tvayi no gunna varjite. My dear Lord, you are the transcendental reservoir of all transcendental qualities. Your pleasure potency, existence potency, and knowledge potency are actually all one internal spiritual potency. The conditioned soul, although actually spiritual, sometimes experiences pleasure, sometimes pain, and sometimes a mixture of pain and pleasure. This is due to his being touched by matter. But because you are above all material qualities, these are found in you. Your superior spiritual potency is completely transcendental, and for you there is no such thing as relative pleasure, pleasure mixed with pain, or pain itself. Because all of these things are material. Relative pleasure is what? Is what the mode of goodness gives. Relative pleasure, it's not real pleasure, but relative to everything else, yeah, I guess you could say it's pleasure. Pleasure mixed with pain is what the mode of passion gives, just a mixture of the two. And pain itself comes from the mode of ignorance. We see all these people. Sometimes I think, especially in Pumakori, where I am right now, sometimes when I'm walking around the town, I'll walk past our local pub, Finian's, they call it. And you'll hear people laughing, ha ha ha, as they're there, dulling their mind, living like two-legged animals, not even worthy even of the human platform. And they're laughing, ha ha ha, getting drunk, all of these things in the mode of ignorance. I can tell you for a fact that laughter is laughter tinged with pure pain. There's only pain behind such laughter. Such laughter is an attempt to hide away even from oneself the pains of this material existence. This is true. Actually, Srila Prabhupada once said, a person said, Srila Prabhupada, can you make me a Brahmin? And Prabhupada said, follow the four regulative principles. I must make you human first. So we can understand. This is why depression is so high. People will say, oh, social networking is making us depressed. Oh, this is making us depressed. That is making us depressed. What is making us depressed is we are living like animals. And while we are humans. And not acknowledging spiritual reality. This is the cause. Of course, there are other causes as well, but this is the main cause in society. So, what is the purpose of these different Shaktis? Well, they do various things. Samvit is obviously, it's providing the conscious experience. Yeah. Sandhini is very interesting because it is not just that existence in Goloka is undergirded by the Sandhini Shakti. Even in Dwarka, see, like this, the Sarupa Shakti is present everywhere. The actual ability for it to exist, the platform upon which it stands upon, is the Shakti of Srimati Radharani. Balaram, yes, provides all the paraphernalia, which is why Balaram represents the Sandhini Shakti. But the actual Shakti itself comes from Srimati Radharani. Even the very ground in which Krishna walks on in Dwarka is provided by the mercy and potency of Srimati Radharani. And then what is the point of the Hladini Shakti? Now we will discuss a little bit. The Hladini Shakti is now being discussed from text 157 onwards for the next few texts. Because this is the one specifically identified with Radharani. Yes, all Shaktis are Radharani, but the one that is most Srimati Radharani is the Hladini Shakti, the one which gives bliss. Sandhini gives Sat and gives existence. We've already discussed this. Samvit gives Chit and Hladini gives Ananda. So Krishna ke ala de tate naam ladini. She shokti dare shukho asha de apni. The potency called Hladini gives Krishna transcendental pleasure. Through this pleasure potency, Krishna personally tastes all spiritual pleasure. So all of the joys that Krishna tastes are tasted only through Radharani. This is her elevated position. There is no joy that Krishna has ever tasted that is independent of Radharani's sweetness. Shukho rup Krishna kore shukho ashadon. Bhakto gone shukho dite hladini karono. Karon. Lord Krishna tastes all kinds of transcendental happiness, although he himself is happiness personified. The pleasure relished by his pure devotees is also manifested by his pleasure potency. So not just only all the joys Krishna tastes, but all the joys that the devotee tastes, they all come from Srimati Radharani, being the Hladini potency, the bliss potency not just of Krishna, but also of Krishna's devotees. Hladinir shar ongsho tar premo nam, Anando chinmoy rosho premer akhan. The most essential part of this pleasure potency is love of Godhead, prema. Consequently, the explanation of love of Godhead is also a transcendental mellow full of pleasure. So here we find the point. Ramananda Rai is actually saying that in order to answer the last three elements of the second question, Radhar Sharup, Rosho and Premo Totto Rup, they're actually all intertwined. If we answer one, we are understanding the others as well. Because Srimati Radharani is the Hladini Shakti. She's that full embodiment of Hladini. But Prema, Prema, Mahabhav Swarupini is the name of Radharani. Radharani is Prema. So if we understand the Tattva of Radha, we also understand the Tattva of Prema. But what else is Prem? Prem, Ananda, this Prem, which is what Ananda is typifying, it is what? Anando Chinmoy Rosho Premor Akhan. Akhana. That Ananda, this Ananda is Chitmaya Rasa, the platform of spiritual mellows. And therefore it is filled with rasas. So all of these are all. Prema is an expression in rasa. This was discussed in the first question of Rai Ramananda Sambad. So in order to understand one, we understand them all, which is how I'm going to be able to, with the remaining half hour or so we have left, to complete all three remaining, not fully, not satisfactorily, but at least for now, I'll be able to complete all other three aspects of the question. Because I sort of misrepresented it, but intentionally, so that we could see the logic of this point, how they all tie together. Really, it's more that Krishna Mahaprabhu asked two questions. But it wasn't explicit that the last three questions were actually just one big question. So we continue going. And we hear this point right here. Radharani is prema. Radharani is the highest form of prem. Premer porom shar. The essential part of prem, what is it? Mohabhavo jani. We should know it to be Mahabhav. She Mohabhav Roop Radha Thakurani. And this Mahabhav is personified in Srimati Radharani. Radha Thakurani. Our Thakurani. And then so there is a quote made from Ujjwala Nilamani. And this quote, we will say it, and then soon we're reaching the point now, however, the point of no return, at which we will no longer be discussing these things of Radharani, and will instead skim over the remainder of this answer to the second question. What does it say? Tayor apyu bhayor madhye radhika sarvathadhika Mahabhava Swarupeyam Gunaira Ati Variyasi. Among the gopis of Vrindavan, Srimati Radharani and another gopi are considered chief. Another gopi we know, Chandravati. But when we compare the gopis, it appears that Srimati Radharani is the most important because her real feature expresses the highest ecstasy of love. The ecstasy of love experienced by the other gopis cannot be compared to that of Srimati Radharani. Premer Shurup Deho Premo Bibhabito Krishner Preyashi Shrestha Jogote Bidito. The body of Srimati Radharani is a veritable transformation of love of Godhead. She is the dearest friend of Krishna, and this is known throughout the world. So now we are about to get into the qualities, so soon we will begin skipping over the rest. But just a small point, Ujjwala Nilamani, now at this point it's very clear. We're entering into a very rasic zone, which is why we're going to stop after 3 more shloks, maybe 2 or 3 more, and then we will stop the discussion. Ujjwala Nilamani is such a high shastra. There are many senior disciples of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Even after taking many disciples, even after being acharyas in their own missions, when they were asked about Ujjwala Nilamani, they would say, I have never read this. It is even too elevated for me. So we should realize we are entering into the very, very, very elevated regions of this discussion. So then, we hear that she is the most dearest friend of Krishna. This is her glory. And then we hear from text 163. This is from the Brahma Samhita, chapter 5, text 37. Ananda Chinmaya Rasa Pratibhavitabhis Tabhirya Eva Nija Rupa Tabhirya Eva Nija Rupataya Kalabhihi Goloka Eva Nivasatya Khilatma Bhuto Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. So here, what does it say? I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord. Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. Who resides in his own realm, Goloka, with Radha, who resembles his own spiritual figure and who embodies the ecstatic potency, Hladini. Their companions are her confidants, who embody extensions of her bodily form and who are imbued and permeated with ever blissful spiritual rasa. And what is the point of saying this? There's actually a specific point that I wanted to mention, and then we will stop. This is speaking about how everything is expanding from Radharani. Because what is the purport from this text from Brahma Samhita? What is it? 537. Actually, if anyone quotes Brahma Samhita, they're going to be quoting the 5th chapter, because we do not currently have the manuscripts of the other chapters. Mahaprabhu only rescued the 5th chapter. But when I say only rescued, I mean only in comparison to the rest of the Brahma Samhita. Not that that is a small contribution. So much depth in Brahma Samhita. What does Krishnadas Kaviraj Thakur say that Rai Ramananda said next? She moha bhavo hoy chintamoni shar Krishna bancha purno kore e karyo tar. That supreme ecstasy of Srimati Radharani is the essence of spiritual life. Her only business is to fulfill all the desires of Krishna. So, here we see some nice ideas of the service attitude of Srimati Radharani. Because, of course, if Srimati Radharani is Mahabhav Swarupini, if Srimati Radharani is Mahabhav Swarupini, and she is, if she's the embodiment of the highest forms of prem, what is prem? Prem is to want only the satisfaction of the beloved. What is kama? What is lust? It is to want the satisfaction of our senses. If Radharani is Mahabhav Swarupini, the embodiment of the highest form, the embodiment of the highest form of that love, then surely everything she wishes to do is in service to Krishna. And so because of this, Srimati Radharani, she is constantly hankering only to please Krishna. And then, what does Ramananda Rai say? Mohabhavo chintamoni radhar shurup lolitadi shokhi tar Kai Buho Roop. He says Srimati Radharani is the topmost spiritual gem, and the other gopis, Lalita, Vishakha, and so on, are expansions of her spiritual body. But this is an interesting point. Kaya Vyuha Roop. We have heard of the Chatur Vyuha. The Chatur Vyuha is who? Sankarshan, Pradyumna, Aniruddha, and now I'm mind blanking. Sankarshan, Pradyumna, Aniruddha. I forgot. It's all right. I'll come back to it later. But the the Chaturvyuha we hear, these are expansions of Krishna in the spiritual realm. The Chaturvyuha are not avatars because they do not descend to this material world. But but they still are there, and we find they expand out. Here in this case, we find that Srimati Radharani has her own form of vyuhas, but they're not like the Chatur Vyuha. They're not full vyuhas, because that would imply that there are 4 Radharanis. But Vasudev, that's the other. Vasudev, sorry, it was just in the back of my head the whole time. Sankarshan, Vasudev, Aniruddha, and Pradyumna. So, then, let me continue. So then, Srimati Radharani, sorry, I got taken off track by that, forgetting that. So then, Radharani has her own form, but they are Kaya Vyuha Roop, so they are a little different. They are expansions of her, but they are not, it's not that they are Radha Tattva, but they are still, this is in one sense, the gopis are her Chatur Vyuha, but it is the Tar Kaya Vyuha Roop, her Kaya Vyuha Rupa. And in fact, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he said this of his disciples. He was speaking to his disciples once, and he said, all of you who are properly following my instructions, you are all my Kaya Vyuha Roop. Why? You have been like expansions of my spiritual body. You have been like expansions of my spiritual body. Why? These gopis, in many ways, they're expansions. Obviously, in one sense, they expand out from Radharani, as do all of the associates, the eternal associates, as does everything. But also because they're having that mood of love and service for Krishna. What is spiritual? What is the spiritual concern? The spiritual concern is to how to please Krishna. And so if one is an expansion of one's spiritual body, they're carrying their mood. Which is why Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said this about his disciples. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said this about his disciples who were what? Who were very chaste to his instructions. Because they had picked up his spiritual mood of service, and therefore, spiritually speaking, they were like expansions of his mood and mission. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said this. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur taught this. And so, what is the message there? The message is that if one abides by the mood of their spiritual master, then one becomes an expansion of the spiritual master. Not in the sense that they become the spiritual master, but because they carry that mood, they reach out. They carry the heart of the spiritual master. And in fact, even in the spiritual world, Srila Prabhupada said, the relationship between the guru and the disciple is eternal. So even in the spiritual world, one's spiritual form becomes related to the spiritual master's spiritual form, Siddha Deha. But these are all rasic things if we go into too much detail. But this is the interesting point regarding this. And so we should also strive to try to serve Srila Prabhupada and our spiritual master who is serving Srila Prabhupada. So that we also can be like expansions. Because that way we can distribute out the mercy of Srila Prabhupada. If we properly serve Srila Prabhupada, then we become like expansions of his mercy. We become the means by which his mercy can be realized into the world. And without his mercy, there's no potency to what we can do anyways. So we should do like this. We should be acting in a way that is spreading out the mercy of Srila Prabhupada. We should act in a way that allows us to be empowered by Srila Prabhupada and therefore to help transform the world. Anyway, so after this, then begins a long description of Srimati Radharani's qualities. And it is from a book written by Srila Raghunath Das Goswami called the Premam Bhoja Maranda. A very rasic text. We will not speak about it. So we will quite literally skip forward quite a few texts. We will go all the way to text 181. Because in text 181, we will find a slight mention. As I said, by understanding Radha Tattva, we understand Prema Tattva, and we understand Rasa Tattva. But there is still a specific mention that is made. And this mention in text 81, it says, Krishner Bishuddh Premo Rotner Akor Onupamo Guno Gono Purno Kolebor. Srimati Radharani is a mind filled with valuable jewels of love for Krishna, Vishuddha Prem. Her transcendental body is complete with unparalleled spiritual qualities. And then there's a quote from Krishna's Kaviraj Thakur's own work, from Govinda Lilamrita. And it is a long shlok. Ka Krishnasya Pranaya Janibhu Srimati Radhikaika Kasya Preyasya Nupama Gunna Radhikaika Na Chanya Jaihmyam Keshe Drishi Taralata Nishthuratvam Kuchesya Vanchapurtyai Prabhavati Hare Radhikaika Na Chanya. If one asks about the origin of love for Krishna, the answer is that the origin is in Srimati Radharani alone. Who is the most dear friend of Krishna? The answer again is Srimati Radharani alone. No one else. And then there is some more talk of Srimati Radharani's qualities that we should not hear in public, or even at all for most of us, for most of our cases. For those of us who have studied Bhagavatam at least once, reading properly through the whole thing, studied Bhagavad Gita, maybe we can read these purports, but even not dwell on them too much, on these texts. So definitely not in a public forum like this, where maybe there are people listening who have not completed the Bhagavad Gita yet. And then there is a glorification. Texts 183 to 184 are just speaking of all the various people who desire, who desire to learn from Srimati Radharani. They want her qualities. They want to know how to please Krishna. They want all of these things, all of these personalities. Satya Bhama, the gopis, Lakshmi, Parvati, Arundhati. Arundhati is the wife of Vasishtha, just in case. These other names are famous, but maybe Arundhati people will not know. So, all of these people, they wish to learn all of these things from Srimati Radharani. And then it keeps on going, and then the point is made. Jar shod guno gonone Krishno na payo par. Tar gunno gonibe kemone jeeb charo. Even Lord Krishna himself cannot reach the limit of the transcendental quality of Srimati Radharani. How then can an insignificant living entity count them? So here, this is the question of prema. What is the nature of prema? It's just reiterating the point that we already made. Prema comes only from Radharani. Radharani is the embodiment of prema, and therefore if we want to learn what prema is, we must learn who Srimati Radharani is. But in order to learn who Srimati Radharani is, we must first understand the philosophy before we can read these qualities, which is why I've skipped over these qualities, and I'm about to skip over another section as well. Because we cannot prematurely enter into these things. If we prematurely enter into these things, if we enter into these things without properly trying to understand them, this will be very disastrous. Why? Because what were we saying? Mahamaya is the shadowy portion of Srimati Radharani. It's the expansion. And how can those of us who still do not realize the nature of that small partial a manifestation of Radharani's potency. If we cannot understand the nature of this, if we still cannot transcend above the material understanding of reality, how then can we expect to understand the fullness of Shakti? First, let us overcome Mahamaya Shakti before we dwell and delve deep into these high philosophical concerns. First, let us do that. This is why. We must do this. First, we must come to know who is Mahamaya. And once we understand and realize the truth of Mahamaya, then we can concern ourselves with realizing the truth of Srimati Radharani. So, with that we will continue. Because, of course, now everything has been answered. Actually, all of second question has been answered. Now we have heard of Krishna Swarup Tattva. Krishna Swarup. We've heard of Radhar Swarup. And by hearing of Radhar Swarup, we have come to understand Rosha Tattva and Prema Tattva. Prema Tattva Rup is understood because Srimati Radharani's form is... Because Srimati Radharani's form is... She is Mahabhav Sarupini. She is the Mahabhav, that Prema. Then next is that Rasa. Rasa necessarily comes from Ananda. The Ananda of which Prem, of which the Hladini Shakti is filled with all of the rasas. So therefore we have understood all of them by understanding Radhar Swarup, or at least beginning to discuss Radhar Swarup. Then Mahaprabhu, he asks one thing. He makes a point, but we will skip over this whole part, because he asks about Radha Krishna pastimes, and he asks about very intimate ones, so we will not discuss it at all. But I'm just making the point that Krishna, Mahaprabhu, he has asked about another question, just to clarify, building upon this second question, not yet the third question. But he's just asking, he's asking Rai Ramananda, what are the further implications? But we will, again, as I said, we will skip over this. Instead, we will come to the very end of the second question. Now that he has informed him, now that he has informed him about these things, he speaks about these things, very, very high things. Prema Vilasa Vivarta, all of these things. And Ramananda Rai, he said, I will speak one thing, a song that I have composed. Because he has composed a song on these very, very high things. Which is why Ramananda Rai said, what did he say? I do not know if you will be happy. Taha shuni tomar shukho hoy ki na hoy. I do not know. Will this make you happy? Will this make you sad? Will this make you not sad but displeased? Because I cannot point to this in Shastra. This level of realization has intentionally been left absent in Shastra because it is so high. This is only realized by the devotee in the depths of their love for Krishna. This is very, very high. And so Ramananda Rai, he goes to speak this composition. And what happens? Eto boli apono krito gito eko gahilo. Premo Prabhu shohoste tar mukho achadilo. Saying this, Ramananda Rai began to sing the song he had composed, but Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu closed his mouth. Out of the ecstasy of love of Godhead, he immediately closed Rai Ramananda's mouth. And so Rai Ramananda could not speak. And there is so much depth to him doing this. And this is also the end of the last question, of the second question. So, with that, we will we will conclude today's, and then we will continue tomorrow the third question, and then hopefully on Wednesday we will finish the fourth question. So, with this though, there is a very deep purport to him covering the mouth of Rai Ramananda. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said, the reason why is because these things should not be spoken out loud. Even though Mahaprabhu has already gone to a secluded place with Rai Ramananda, even then, these things should never even be spoken out loud. They are so high, so esoteric. Only when one is on the highest platform, completely beyond everything else, can they understand these things. then they will be able to understand the Supreme Lord through their senses. This is the text. Sarvopadi vinirmuktam tatparatvena nirmalam hrishikena hrishikesha sevanam bhakti ruchyate. By moving beyond material designations, we can understand these things. And therefore, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he says that this text that would be spoken, this topic, some people might hear and they will not be qualified to hear, and they will misinterpret. And after misinterpreting, they will completely butcher the meaning, and then we'll have the sahajiyas. We listed, remember earlier, the many apasampradayas, foremost of which are the prakrita sahajiyas. All of these people will not be able to understand. So Mahaprabhu closed his mouth in order to indicate people should not hear this thing. They should be hidden. Furthermore, Mahaprabhu maybe closed his mouth just out of ecstasy. He was becoming so ecstatic. The ecstasy almost hurt, and he said, "Do not say it. I will go into such deep ecstasy. Be quiet for now." This is another element. Actually, we could speak forever about Mahaprabhu closing the mouth of Rai Ramananda. It is very, very deep. But for the sake of time, we will only discuss one more consideration, and then we will conclude for today, and then we will continue tomorrow with the third question. So, the other reason why is because we were mentioning earlier that Rai Ramananda, he was hinting Krishna. This is Krishna before me. Of course, he's also explicitly said it, but he was coming, not just saying you are the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but he was really coming to the point of saying, Krishna, you are Krishna who wants to taste Krishna's beauty. He was going to fully reveal his identity, that you are Radharani. You are Krishna and Radharani. You are Krishna tasting Radharani's mood. Rai Ramananda was about to proclaim that. And Mahaprabhu didn't want that. Maybe he can identify him as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but to identify his purpose, to identify his mission like that, that was too much for Mahaprabhu. That was too risky. Mahaprabhu had to remain hidden. He did not want the most intimate parts of his identity to be exposed out to the world. This is why he slapped Rupa Goswami when Rupa Goswami revealed the true meaning of the song that he sang at Ratha Yatra. And so because of this, Mahaprabhu closes his mouth. Do not say this. Do not speak. Do not mention this. Do not speak of my identity. You hinted to it before, and now you are getting so close to fully mentioning it. You are coming so close to mentioning and explaining my heart, but my heart is not meant to be revealed yet. Do not speak of it. And this also ties in now to the final sense of the meaning. Because these high things that Ramananda Rai was speaking, Mahaprabhu also would also close his mouth to say, what is the point of saying these things? These high things, they are embodied in me. Close your mouth and see. That which you speak of, those elevated things that you speak of are before you in person as me, Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. I am the conclusion of all those shlokas. You do not need to speak any text. All that text means is found in me before you. So these are all very many tattvas, very many ideas that can be pulled from the Mahaprabhu's action. And many more are there, but we have concluded for today. And on that note, we will conclude the discussion, and we will continue again tomorrow. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ki jai, Shri Rai Ramananda ki jai, Shri Rai Ramananda Sambad ki jai, Shri Krishna's Kaviraj Thakur ki jai, Shri Caitanya Caritamrita ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Nitai Gaura Premanande, Hari Hari Bol. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripasindubhyaiva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Anantakoti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. Hare Krishna.